All right, so hello everyone, and welcome to another Bandology interview. I'm Mark, I'm the Music and Research Coordinator here. And just to tell you a little bit about Bandology, Bandology is a Canadian nonprofit. It's dedicated to more music for more kids via education, collaboration, and community. And as part of our live stream series today, we have Emily Wood. She's a PhD student at the McMaster Institute for Music in the Mind. And I'm really looking forward to interviewing you, Emily. It's going to be a really great time. Looking forward to all the insight you can provide in terms of sort of the connection between music and research and music education and sort of your path through it all. Yeah, so I'm really looking forward to it. And with that out of the way, how about we just start off with your position at the Institute and sort of, yeah, what you do there. And everything like that.
Yeah, well, thanks, Mark. Happy to be here. So I'm a PhD student at the Institute of Music in the Mind at McMaster University, and I think it's really pretty much my dream position. So as a PhD student, I get to collaborate with researchers, work with really qualified researchers in the field, and we study questions about music. So we come up with a question about, why do we have music? How does our brain perceive music? Or, how do musicians play together? We might ask a question like this. And then once we have a question, we design a research experiment to answer that question. So we get to do some research design. And then once we design an experiment, we collect the data. So a lot of the time we're studying musicians, actually. So we might invite musicians in. We might collect some data from them. It might be motion capture. It might be neural data, so brain data. And once we have that, we analyze it. We write up the results. And so by the end of my degree, I will have run several experiments, and I'll have written up several experiments into this nice dissertation package. So that's pretty much what I do for my position, and I really enjoy it a lot.
Yeah, and I remember reading a little bit about you and noticing that you actually have a Bachelor of Music in jazz piano performance, and that's really striking to me. Somebody that is a PhD student at a very well recognized lab in McMaster. With a Bachelor of Music, you don't really see that all that often. So I just wanted to ask, I guess, the process of choosing, well, yeah, just sort of take me through your education career, I guess, your path through deciding, well, I've completed this Bachelor of Music and now I want to move on to something else and pursue some sort of thing in science.
Yeah, that's a really great question. I have kind of a interesting academic path, actually. It took me a while to figure out what I wanted to do. But so when I was 18, I started my music degree in jazz piano performance at McGill University. So I'm from a small town in BC, actually. So I moved across the country, moved to Montreal, and all of a sudden I was immersed in this super vibrant city in downtown Montreal, where the music is amazing. There's such amazing jazz musicians in Montreal. So I did a 4-year music degree there at McGill, and it was such a great experience, and I can't believe how much I learned and how much better at music I got. I actually hadn't even had that much jazz experience before I got there, so it was really, really amazing to be around such amazing musicians and learn a lot from them. So by the end of that degree, I knew that I didn't want to be a performing musician as my career. It just wasn't really the lifestyle I thought that was right for me. But, I always knew that music is so important to me, and music is everything to me. And I knew that I wanted a career related to music, and I had no idea at that point what it would be. For a while, I was thinking music education, actually, for a while. I actually did a minor in music education while I was at McGill as well. But I wasn't too sure. And I was also interested in music therapy as well. Would be interesting. So what I did actually is I just started taking some psych courses, some psychology courses. And this was at Ryerson University in Toronto at this point. So I'd moved to Toronto and I was taking some psychology courses because they were prerequisites for music therapy. So I thought, I'll try them out. And you know what? So while I was taking these psychology courses, I actually started talking to some of my professors and I actually started telling them a little bit about my background. I said, I have this music degree and I'm interested in psychology and I'm just trying to figure things out. And one of my professors said, "Oh, you have to go work in this music cognition lab at Ryerson." And I was like, "There's a music cognition lab at Ryerson?" I had no idea. So I ended up going and knocking on the door at this lab and introducing myself to this lab. So I was working with Dr. Frank Rousseau at Ryerson. So he has this lab. He studies music cognition and how we hear music and perceive music. And it was my first time ever learning that, oh, this is actually something that I could be a part of. So I started volunteering there. And then eventually I got a research assistant position. So I started working there. At first I was actually doing hearing tests in the lab. That was what I started off on. But then, I ended up spending 3 years working in that lab. Actually, I just kind of fell in love with the research and I ended up completing a second undergraduate degree in psychology because I loved it so much. And I did a thesis in that lab there at Ryerson. So once I finished that, I was kind of set on research. I really enjoyed it. So I started applying for PhD programs, and that's what drew me to McMaster. So McMaster has an amazing music cognition program, and it has really great researchers. As you know, we have the Institute of Music in the Mind, a whole network of researchers. And actually, that's how I knew about my current PhD supervisor, Laurel Trainer. I had read her research and I was a big fan of her work. And I thought, I'm going to apply to work with her. So I applied and I met her and things just worked out. And here I am at McMaster. I feel like I got my dream position and yeah, now all I get to do is, dream up how the brain processes music. I get to dream up, how does this musical phenomenon work? And then I get to design an experiment to actually see, whether our hypothesis is supported or not. So yeah, I feel so lucky to be here and doing this PhD here at McMaster.
Yeah, so that's really interesting for someone or for viewers that maybe don't really, they've never seen the inside of a lab, or that's sort of like a mystical world for them. How about you provide like a day in a life sort of, what is it like? I know obviously this past year hasn't been normal, so I would love to talk a little bit about that a little later, but let's imagine that COVID-19 does not exist. Sort of what's a day in a life for a music researcher at the McMaster Institute for Music in the Mind?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I briefly mentioned before a little bit about the stages of research, like coming up with questions and designing the research and then collecting the data. So the day in the life kind of depends on what stage you are along in that research. So if I'm at the part where I'm coming up with questions, I might be in my lab, I might be at my desk, and I might be, reading a lot of scientific papers. So reading other publications, seeing what people have done and seeing, okay, they've done this, but they haven't done this yet. This is a question that's not answered yet. So maybe we can do a study here. But if I'm in the middle of actual data collection, that's kind of the fun part. So maybe I'm in the middle of an experiment. So in that case, maybe we have participants coming in and we're collecting data. So we might have musicians coming in. So we might greet the musicians down in our lobby and bring them up to our lab. It's called the Live Lab at McMaster. So for anyone who hasn't heard of the Live Lab at McMaster, this is a really unique venue we have. So it's actually a performance hall, a naturalistic performance hall with 100 seats and a stage at the front, but it's also a research lab. So it's kind of like a hybrid between a concert hall and a research lab. And it's so unique. There's no facility like it in North America. It's equipped with technology that lets us answer our questions. So we have a motion capture system in there, so we can record how musicians move in really great detail. We have an EEG system. So pretty much this is a system that allows us to record electrical activity of the brain just from placing electrodes on the scalp. So we can record the activity of populations of neurons. And we can do that in the musicians who are on the stage, and we can also record it in up to 30 audience members as well. So really great. So we can look at interactions between audience and musicians as they play, which is really, really neat. What else? We also have physiology. So we can record like heart rate, respiration rate, or skin conductance as well. So as you know, like sometimes, you know, when you're listening to music, you have like a physiological response, like you get goosebumps. So things like, so we can measure things like that in such a naturalistic setting. So if I'm collecting data, we would bring musicians in, and I've been doing motion capture actually. So we might fit the motion capture on the musicians, we might put them on the stage, and then we'll ask them to play, and we'll record how they move, and we get their data, we can analyze that. So if we're collecting data, that might be my day, but if the data collection is done, my day might be actually taking that data and bringing it into some sort of coding software. I've been using something called MATLAB. This is like coding language. So I use that, and we analyze the data, and we make some really beautiful plots. So it really depends on what stage we are in the research, but yeah, so those are potential days in the life as a PhD student.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. I know sort of my first introduction to like a lab setting was like really, really cool. It's nothing, you sort of go into it when you're really young, and you think of, you know, all the shows you've watched, and like, but when you're actually there, just, you know, some of these labs are so specific, and they measure, and it's just so cool, the instruments that they use, and as in the scientific instruments they use,
Yes.
and in this case, the actual instruments they use, I'm sure as well, musical instruments. Yeah, it's definitely, it always amazes me. Specific labs are just really, really cool, and it's just, you walk in, and it's amazing. So speaking about sort of the lab itself, are there any particular projects that you're working on that are really interesting, or things that you've done in the past, or just maybe not you specifically, but just generally the lab has been working on that maybe you want to talk about or tell people about?
Yeah, sure. So I'll tell you a little bit about the motion capture work I've been working on. So we're really interested in how musicians move. So one of the questions we have is, you know, how do musicians actually play together? So if you think about it, like musicians have to play together like so precisely in time, like they have to play their notes together, and like if you're off, like you can hear it so well. So how do they coordinate so precisely? This is actually a really hard thing. And if you think about coordination and humans coordinating together, there's not many other circumstances where we have to coordinate so precisely. I think music is probably the task that humans have to coordinate the most precisely. So how do they do this? How do their brains do this? So if you think about it, you know, not only do musicians have to like plan their own notes and plan what they're playing, but they also have to anticipate what their partners are playing and what they're going to play and when they're going to play it. So their brains are always thinking ahead, anticipating what notes their partners will play next and when to play them. So it's really interesting kind of problem and how our brains are able to do this. So one of the ways we are trying to look at this problem is through the movements that musicians make. So I mentioned we have motion capture. We can look at their movements in great detail. And if you look at how musicians move when they play, like if you imagine a string quartet or something like that, and you imagine them playing, you know, the only thing that's really necessary to play music is to move your articulators at the right time. So in the case of violin, you have to move your fingers at the right spot on the fretboard and move your bow at the right time. And that's all that's necessary to play music, right? But if you look at string players, they don't just move their fingers and their arms, they're also swaying their body and making these expressive gestures. So we asked, okay, so why are musicians making these movements that are absolutely not necessary to play their instrument? They must have some sort of function or role in the musical interaction. So we were wondering, maybe these movements are actually helping them to coordinate together. Maybe they're helping them to end, as a musician, you might know that the way you move before you play your next notes kind of indicates like the dynamics or the phrasing or the tempo that you're planning to play. So it could help each other anticipate when to play next. So what we do is we motion capture their movements, and we take their body sway movements. So these body sway movements. So we record them, and then we get from that data, we get a time series for each musician. So we get like a time series from the cello player, how they move their body, and we get a time series from the violin player, how they move their body. And then we can do all sorts of fun analyses on these time series. So we're interested in if they're communicating with each other. So we use a really interesting analysis that pretty much determines how much they're influencing each other. So we can see how does the violin one player movements influence that of the cello movement and vice versa. And we can look between every pair in the quartet and see how they are communicating with each other. And we found some actually really cool things with this method. We did an experiment where we, manipulated who was the leader in a string quartet. So on one trial, let's see, the violin one player is going to be the leader here. And then on another trial, the cello player is going to be the leader here, and all the other musicians are following. And when we do that, we see that the leader's movements will influence those of the followers' movements more than vice versa. No matter who we assign to be the leader, they will influence the body sway movements of all the other musicians. So we thought, that kind of indicates maybe this is some sort of nonverbal communication going on between the musicians. And so we're expanding those studies. We also did another study where we asked musicians to play with emotional expression or without emotional expression. And we looked at these body sway interactions, and we see, again, higher communication between all the musicians when they play with emotional expression than without, which was also interesting because, when you have to play with emotion, there's kind of more information to convey to the other musicians. So that kind of made sense. And now I'm working on a project that looks at how those interactions change as musicians learn to play music together. So there's all sorts of interesting questions we can answer with this method. So that's one of the really cool projects that are going on in the lab right now, although it was kind of put on pause for a bit during the COVID-19.
Yeah. Before I ask sort of the looming question of how the lab was able to cope, I just wanted to sort of stay on that idea, because it really is like, that's what I really love about throughout a variety of music labs throughout Canada. It's just so interesting, like as a musician myself, like something that's so well known to us being like defined and explained with some actual terms, where we can actually sort of figure out, well, why do we do that? Because it's true, the amount of communication that goes into it. I mean, you can't yell something to you're a jazz pianist, so I'll use the context that I'm most comfortable with. If you're in a jazz trio or a quartet, you can't just yell, oh, we're moving on to the next section to
Exactly.
in the middle of a performance. And it's just things like this, learning
body language.
And so now if I play a performance or anything, maybe I'll keep track of sort of what I'm doing. And in terms of how like emotional expression makes its way in like other forms with music, that's really interesting, because the common trope, especially with like piano players who are just learning to play, their teacher asks them to play more with more expression, play more emotion, and then they exaggerate movements, and they really overemphasize their body, and that's just like, that's a really common, it's almost like a joke that like, oh, if you go to like a piano recital, and you can easily tell whether or not their teacher told the student to play with more emotion, because they may not even have any reason for it, just their teacher told them to play with more emotion, but it's almost intuitive that they're like, well, now I'm going to move more and try. There's no
Exactly.
way I can express it with playing notes any differently because I have to play the piece of music. So it's just yeah, even something like that, like thinking about like a young student, a young mind thinking, well, how can I express myself more? Um, well, I'm just going to move a lot more, and hopefully my teacher
Exactly. I mean,
notices it. And
yeah,
yeah,
movements are so powerful and humans are so tuned in with music. So from this motion capture data, we can actually make these little point-like displays. So we can just show the motion capture data with stick figures pretty much.
mm,
And we can show that to an audience that has no idea what the musicians were playing. Actually, we did show it to audience members without volume. So they couldn't even hear what the musicians were playing. And we showed them one where musicians were playing with emotion and show them one where they're playing without emotion. And resoundingly, the audience can tell when
mm,
musicians are playing with emotion just from looking at their movements. So there's such powerful conveyors of music or of information.
mm.
And they're just intrinsically tied to music as well, because you can't make music without movement. So it's really, really fascinating. And I will say, you mentioned the development of expressive body movements in children. That is such an interesting question. We don't have like any research on how do kids learn how to be expressive, and when
Mm,
can we see that in their body sway? How does that develop? When does it emerge in development? We don't know, and that's actually a question we want to answer
mm.
in the lab. So that's probably going to be one of the experiments in the future coming up. Once the pandemic is over, we can have groups of kids come into the lab, and we want to bring in groups of kids learning how to play music together. And maybe some of them will have experience playing with others, maybe some of them will only have experience playing by themselves, and look at how they communicate with their fellow musicians.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So I'm definitely going to be keeping an eye on sort of the
Yeah.
output and reading what comes from that because it's definitely like yeah, like I said, it's so interesting to come from a music background and read all these like completely new novel studies that are explaining things that are just sort of intuitive, um,
Exactly.
things that you
Yeah.
don't even really think about, sort of the impact of it. And yeah, so
Mhm.
that's really cool.
Yeah, and I'll
And
also say that you mentioned jazz musicians. So
yeah, yeah.
I have something to say about that too. So all the studies we've done so far have actually been with classical
Mm,
ensembles, which is really great. We can answer such rich questions with these ensembles. But if you think about music of the world, across the world, classical music is actually kind of an anomaly, right? If you think about it, right? Because this is like highly composed music. We
mm,
actually call it highly scripted, right? The whole interaction is scripted out on piece of paper, every single note that every single musician is going to play. I mean, but if you look at the world, it's not really how people play music across the world. Music is more like an interaction between people. It's like a conversation. People are, improvising, they're in groups together, they're having a good time. So these classical groups might not actually be representative of music in general. So something we want to do is actually study this body sway in jazz musicians, because jazz musicians aren't playing scripted music, they are
mm,
improvising. So this might be more generalizable to music across the world. So actually, before the COVID pandemic, I was designing a research experiment using jazz musicians. I was going to look at how their body sway communication changed when they were improvising compared to when they were playing memorized music.
mm.
But as I was piloting this experiment, the pandemic hit, and unfortunately, it has been paused for now. But I'm hoping to get back to that soon when it ends. And yeah, so to actually study a group outside of classical musicians for the first time.
Yeah, no,
Mhm.
I'm sure that'll be really, really interesting.
Mhm.
Yeah, so I'm definitely going to keep tabs on the research output for the institute, and it would be very cool to see how right now it's sort of uh, like a lot of the research, at least from what I could sort of glean from the research available to me, it's a lot of we're looking at music and trying to analyze, and like we're working backwards. We're seeing things that already exist, but what would be very cool, and sort of like in the distant future, sort of turning it over and seeing, well, teachers that know the importance of body language or movement, in the, for example, the process of improvisation, taking that knowledge. So for teachers to look at the research and then apply it to their actual lessons and use it as a way to teach music better, or yeah, sort of improve the teaching capabilities. I think that's really going to be something that's really, really helpful to sort of expand music education. And yeah, so I'm looking at it, at all this new music and all this new music research with sort of, it's really cool to have some of these intuitive things defined, and it also I think it's going to be really, really informative and really helpful for future generations to learn music, because a lot of this stuff can be applied into teaching and
Yeah,
that whole
absolutely.
section.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that yeah, one of the implications of this work that we're showing is that, you know, movements are so powerful, and it's something that is a really fundamental process of playing music as with others. So I think it will have implications for music education, how we think about teaching music to kids, and how they can develop this kind of sense of expressivity.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think let's move on and let's answer finally that question of how the COVID-19 pandemic influenced sort of the process of the lab, or if it just was, like you said, I know some of your projects were shut down or paused. So yeah, maybe you could just provide a little bit of an explanation in terms of how the lab adjusted, or just sort of what was the climate with the pandemic.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, when the pandemic started, we couldn't test in person anymore. So we couldn't go into the lab, and we couldn't collect data right off the bat. So we were, all of a sudden, we were restricted to just collecting research using online platforms. And actually, it's actually kind of, I wouldn't have expected it, but we actually adapted to this, and we've actually gotten some great data from online studies. So one of my fellow PhD students, he's running some tapping experiments online. He's looking at like timing illusions. So it's like a tapping experiment you can do online. So he can collect data that way. It's easy to, you know, tap on your computer at home. So that's one way that we've gone forward. We've been doing like online surveys as well. I know some of my other collaborators at the lab, they're looking at dancers and how dancers perceive syncopation. So they have like these online experiments where they have dancers go and listen to these different types of syncopated rhythm and how it relates to how they move. So it's like online surveys. And then me, myself, you know, I was studying groups. I was studying groups of musicians.
You were the hard hit.
You know, now I think we're able to test like single participants now that things have gotten better, but groups are going to be the last type of participant, I guess, that we'll be able to test, because, you know, there's more risk when you have groups. So what I have been doing, well, I started getting interested in facial expressions. So I told you I was, you know, looking at body sway and how communicative it is. But, you know, musicians don't only communicate with their body. There's other ways for them to communicate. And one of them is with their facial expressions. So that's actually been one thing I've been exploring a bit over the pandemic, collecting video recordings of musicians. And we have some really interesting computer vision softwares that can actually analyze facial expressions. You know, the technology has changed so much over the last couple, well, yeah, it's always evolving so fast. Like in the past, facial expression researchers would, you know, have to code manually each muscle that moved on the face. But now we have computer algorithms that can do that. They can, you know, find this one muscle on the face, and they can tell you how exactly it was activated. So it's really incredible, actually. So I've been experimenting with this a little bit to see if I can look at communication in facial expressions between musicians. And I'm also interested in facial expressions musicians make while they play. So sometimes you see them make these really expressive faces, and sometimes they're called like bass face or guitar face, when I'm
Yeah, yeah,
talking
yeah,
about these facial
exactly. Yeah.
expressions. So I'm interested, why do musicians make these facial expressions? Are they helping the musicians play, or is it just for show? Is it just for the audience? That's a question I have. I'm not sure. So that's one thing I've been exploring as well. And then on top of that, we actually already had some motion capture data collected before the pandemic. So I was actually able to analyze some of that during the pandemic. So it's not like I was stranded with nothing to do. I still had lots to do during the pandemic, but I'm really looking forward to getting back and actually finishing those experiments that we had planned that were paused. So we'll resume those as soon as we can. And yeah, so it really hasn't been that bad, to be honest. I think everyone has been very resilient. We've all found ways to adapt and find new ways of collecting data using online platforms.
Hmm.
And the good thing about that is that it makes it more accessible, right? Because more people over the world, at least those who have internet connection, we can, have a larger kind of pool of participants instead of people who are, only undergraduate students to come into the lab, or, only people who live in Hamilton or things like that.
Yeah, no, that was I think, like, I was just, when I was writing the question and sort of thinking about, well, how could a lab adapt? I think that's definitely like a really interesting point to think about, that maybe from now on things that can be online will be, because it's just, it increases the amount of people you can see and the amount of data you can get. Just quickly talking about like base face and stuff like that, like qualitatively you can add it and you can make a note. For me at least, I feel like it's both, it's just completely out of habit, but maybe it does help. It definitely doesn't hurt, and it's definitely not for the audience in my case, because sometimes I look back at videos and I'm like, why did I make that face? That's terrible. That it actually hurts my performance, because like people are focused more on my facial expression than the actual music that I'm creating. So
yeah, no,
but
that's really interesting. I mean, it's kind of weird to say it, but I really think that, what you're playing on your instrument, it's represented in your body and it's represented in your face. So you're playing like some super high note and you see like your eyebrows go up. It's almost like the music is being represented on your face. I just find that so fascinating. So yeah, I'm super curious, like what is this facial expression doing for musicians?
Anyways, I just wanted to sneak that in. But I mean, talking about the pandemic and sort of you mentioning that you weren't completely out of things to do, sort of I wanted to connect it a little bit to maybe some of the other stuff, some of the more musical things that maybe a lot of people turned to, their hobbies and worked on things, tried to build on skills that they had just with all the extra time working from home or anything like that. And so I wanted to ask, obviously you received a Bachelor of Music, so you have already extensive musical training and you're doing research related to music, so you're around music all the time. But I wanted to ask sort of more personally, how have you kept music in your life? I know you're a piano player, so obviously there's plenty of opportunities to sort of practice. But so yeah, I just wanted to ask, sort of what was your have you kept music in your life, and was it difficult, or
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Yeah, so I've kind of had an interesting relationship with playing music ever since I graduated from my degree, so or my music degree. So when I was doing my music degree, I was playing constantly. I remember I was practicing for 5 hours a day, like 6 days a week, when I was in the midst of it. And and music was always something I loved so much as a kid. When I was growing up, I loved it. I was playing in like every band I could, and I played every instrument I could get my hands on. But then as soon as I got to music school and I had this kind of pressure, it started to become a little bit more of a job than more of a passion. So once I graduated from music school, I kind of wanted to take a break from performing music. So I kind of backed off a little bit and I took a little bit of a break. But the really special thing about music is that it'll always be there. It's always in you, even if you take some time away. Like it's not gone. It's still there. It just taking a back seat for a little while. So so I kind of took a little bit of time off from playing, but ever since I've started my PhD and I've been in the lab, I felt more inspired again, and yeah, I'm playing again. It's for fun. So recently I composed some music for a film for the Hamilton Fringe Festival. So I kind of did that kind of on the side for fun. So like I used to compose all the time in my music degree. So it was kind of fun to bring that out again. And I'd never done it for a film before. So that was a new experience to me. And oh man, that is so interesting too. The role of music in film. That's another super interesting research direction as well that I don't do, but I think it's pretty fascinating. And I'm actually home here in BC right now, and I've reconnected with my musical community here, and I jam with friends. And in Hamilton, I jam, like I'm at the Institute of Music in the Mind. Like there's a lot of musicians there, and actually sometimes like we might jam a little bit for fun as well. The experiment's done. Okay, we can play some music now. So it's there in my life, and it's such a huge part of my life. And yeah, it's so interesting because here I am doing science, which is such an analytical kind of task, and like I also have this super creative side of me, which, and I have this interplay kind of between these two sides of me. And I think that especially for research, that my knowledge of music gives me some sort of intuition that I wouldn't have otherwise. I feel like it's probably one of my greatest strengths as a scientist, to have this musical background, like this really extensive musical background as well. So yeah, it'll always be a part of my life, and I'll incorporate it into no matter what I do.
Yeah, I think that's beautiful in terms of the role it plays. And I think like a lot of sort of, there's a lot of pressure, I'd say, on younger musicians to sort of figure out what they want to do. And a great deal of them sort of have to go through some sort of conflict, trying to figure out, well, like music's great, I really want to do something there, but I also am interested in all these other things. And you really hear a lot that, like, well, as a musician, especially, I mean, I'm sure you heard it in your undergraduate degree, as a musician, it's music. You have to be 100% dedicated to music. You have to practice 5 hours a day, or you won't be able to make it. And I don't know. I think, I mean, personally, you sort of, as you go through your degree, as you move on and you explore other things, you sort of realize that, well, no, that's not true at all. It can be whatever you'd like, and it can play whatever role you'd like. And I think that's just, I mean, I feel the exact same way. I feel really lucky to have that. And I do think it makes people, everyone that I've talked to that has some sort of musical training, really feels that, like, that's probably the thing that makes them them, and just really is a huge part of their identity. So thank you. That was really, really well said. And I think,
well, I just want to say, for anyone listening, like any musicians listening, like music is, it's subject, it's not like a sport where someone can objectively be the best. Like this is a subjective thing. There's no point in, I mean, of course it's natural to compare yourself to others, but you are an individual, and what you have to offer as an individual is special. And like you have to nurture what is unique to yourself, and no matter what that is valuable. And what you have to offer the world is special no matter what. And you don't have to be comparing yourself to others, and you don't have to be trying to think of yourself as the best. I think that is just like the worst mindset to have as a musician. Just nurture what is unique about you and what you have in yourself.
Well, I think, that was really, really well said. Maybe you should take up a part-time job as a inspirational speaker.
Oh man, yeah.
No, but thank you so much. I think the interview is sort of coming to a close, but I just wanted to thank you again so much for coming on. One last thing. at Bandology, if we do any sort of interview or anything like that, we like to finish it off with just a super casual sort of fast five questions, a set of questions that are just sort of, you know, fun, and it's a nice way to close the interview. So I'll paste them in the chat so that you have them right there. And then I'll just go through, list them all, and then you can just answer them one at a time. Perfect. So that, let me see. All right, that might be a little hard to read, but
I got it.
Okay, perfect. So yeah, starting off, favorite movie soundtrack. Another is a hidden talent you have. The next, what's an instrument you don't play but you wish you play? If you could spend an afternoon with any musician or band, who would it be and why? And last, who was your musical inspiration growing up?
Okay, great. So favorite movie soundtrack, that's a great question. I'm not so much of a movie buff actually, but I think, you know, whenever you hear incredible music, it just adds so much to a film. So I'm going to say Star Wars, because that is, I mean, without that music, that film wouldn't have been as successful it was, I believe. Truly, the music is like so important in that. That's what made it successful. Okay, a hidden talent I have. I like to slackline. So that's when you set up like a rope in between two trees and walk across it. So I do that all the time. I love it. An instrument I wish I played. So, man, okay. So I mentioned that I did a minor in music education, and for that I had to actually try every single wind instrument, get the basics of everyone. And you know what? Sometimes an instrument feels really good, and the oboe felt really good. I felt like, oh, like it suits me. It feels right. And I never played it, so I'll say oboe for that. If I could spend an afternoon with any musician or band, who would it be and why? I feel like I will have a different answer for this question depending on the month you ask me. But right at this moment, I think it would be Jacob Collier.
Oh yeah, no,
music is so amazing. I'm such a huge fan. He has such interesting perspective, and yeah. Okay, and who was your musical inspiration growing up? Oh, that's a great question as well. So I didn't mention this, but I actually played a lot of Celtic music growing up. So I was like an ear-based learner in the kind of traditional Celtic realm. I started on fiddle, but then I ended up moving to piano, and I would play piano for the fiddle player. So my musical inspiration was Hamish Napier, who is an amazing Celtic piano player. You might not know him, but you should check out his album, The River and The Woods. Really, really amazing musician. So that's kind of on the Celtic side, but on the jazz side, I'll say Oscar Peterson. I was always very, very drawn to him.
I'd say, yeah, Jacob Collier, Oscar Peterson, definitely. I think for sure, if I could spend afternoon, it would probably also be with Jacob Collier. I've been listening to a lot of his music this past week, really revisiting some of his old albums. I just had a flash of Jacob Collier listening desire, so that's definitely I agree.
Every day.
yeah. Well, thank you so much again for coming on. I really, really enjoyed talking about all sorts of different things, and I think a lot of our viewers are really going to enjoy. I know, I think it's a world. Music research is a world that not a lot of people sort of think about, but it's something that's super interesting and really cool. And I think it's going to be, lots of people are going to get interested. And if you're watching and you're interested in any of that, definitely check out the McMaster Institute for Music and the Mind website. And I think they have plenty of information about that. And so any sort of research that you're interested in from this interview, I think they have loads more on there. So definitely check that out. And for more information about Bandology, you can visit us at our website, bandology.ca. We have a lot of content there, including a lot of music research as well. Gathered music research, not anything that we've made ourselves, but still it's a really good resource to look for things like this. And we have plenty more interviews like this as well. So yeah, I just wanted to thank you again, Emily, for coming on. It was a treat, and yeah.
Yeah, thanks for having me.